Welcome everyone, and and welcome if you're watching online. And we know that that's an important way for people to connect, especially people dealing with chronic pain, chronic illness. Sometimes they're not able to participate in live events, and part of the reason why we do what we do is try to help churches stay connected to those people that maybe aren't even able to come to church. And I know from personal experience because I was a preacher for 20 years, and before I had chronic illness, chronic pain, I kind of would lose sight of some of those people that maybe they stopped coming and may even make wrong assumptions about them. Well, they're just not very faithful, not coming to church anymore. And it turned out that they, had some reason, some physical reason that they weren't able to come. And so I always appreciate when we can offer a virtual connection, but I'm also just glad to have some people in person too. So I'm not just talking to a camera. So thank you for coming. Like I said, I'm David Heflin. My wife Katie's back there, and she's going to share a little bit here in a moment as well. So let me just, say first of all, I'm grateful for the invitation to get to do this. Thankful to Mike, thankful to Larry and Diane. We have connections to both. Mike and I worked together for a brief time, and wish it would have been much longer, but we did get to overlap a little bit in New Mexico, and we became fast friends there. Had a lot of similar interest, and so it's good to get to be reconnected. I've stayed in touch with Mike in various ways throughout the years, but this is actually the first time I've seen him in 15 years. Yeah. So you're 38 now, is that right, Mike?
Close enough.
Close enough. So you were just a kid, right? Yeah. So 23, 20, something in that ballpark when I was there, and I'm actually, you're older than I was when I first met you. So yeah, it makes me feel old anyway. So
I feel old.
Yeah. Our connection with the Stevens actually go back much further through my wife, Katie. They were in the mission field together in Kenya between 91 to 96. Of course, Larry and Diane were there for many more years than that, but my future in-laws at that time, were there with Katie as she was going through from 8th grade to her senior year in Nairobi, Kenya. And so it's really, really nice to get to reconnect with people. And I'm always amazed at, how these opportunities, these connections, and all that kind of, work together. We don't have a lot of time together this morning, and I'm already kind of like trying to cram 4 sessions together, into basically 2 hours. And so I'm going to kind of move quick, but I don't want it to be something that you don't feel like you can raise your hand, offer a comment, ask a question, and we'll pause a few different times too, where you can do that. And I know we have some people here from the Stephen Ministry, and I've just been finding out about that myself. Mike told me maybe about a week ago about it, and then I got to hear a lot about it from Larry and Diane. We were staying with them last night, and so that's what a great ministry. And obviously, I could see how there could be a lot of overlap in the things that we're trying to do to be a blessing to hurting people. So I don't know if you're coming here from that perspective. You're coming here from the perspective of someone who is struggling with chronic pain or illness, or maybe both. Some people might certainly be in both that category. And certainly, if you are going through that, then you're in a unique position to be able to also be a blessing to others who are going through it, as well. So I see one of my friends from Kenya online there. So yeah, we have a lot of people in Kenya. I'll tell you about them in a little bit. So grateful. Let me just jump down here. Yeah, I want to say it's our first time in this area. It's the first time in Michigan, so we're glad to be here. I think it's really beautiful, and you must have this perfect weather all year. Yeah. So we're glad we get to be here. Yeah,
Really nice then.
Yeah. Well, we're glad we get to be here now. And this is kind of something we've been working. I couldn't do this when I was a full-time preacher, what we're calling like a Broken and Mended seminar, or Broken and Mended weekend. And the reason was because I had to be at my church every Sunday for the obligations I have there. Well, now I can do this, and we did one of these back in the spring, and then no one really likes to do any of this stuff in the summer. So really our second time to do this. But as it turns out, we'll be doing it next weekend. I'll be doing it next weekend. Katie doesn't get to go with me on that trip. She has obligation. Yeah, she did. Yeah, I'll be suffering away in Florida next week. But the one that we had in Texas was kind of like our whole seminar. And there we did like 9 different sessions. We started on Friday night. We're meeting Saturday morning. we had individual meetings Saturday afternoon, and then we had more sessions Saturday evening, and then I did the Sunday morning stuff. I was exhausted. But that was not a situation in which we were competing with college football and all that kind of stuff. That was in the spring, and also it was North Central Texas where I grew up, and North Central Texas is not really known for its college football mania like places like here, and even where we live now in Oklahoma with OU, and which I understand are playing the Wolverines today. And I want you to know that we are all going for the Wolverines because we're Oklahoma State fans. And so we're with you today. But anyway, so that was not a big deal there. And of course, it was the spring anyway. So we're just grateful to get this work in however we can today. We're here as a couple, partly because I'm not sure if the Stevens would have allowed me to come without Katie. But more importantly, it's not just my story. This is our story. And so talking about that story a little bit together. Most of the time it'll be me, but Katie's going to share a few times from her perspective. Both of our lives, though, have been radically changed by my health problems. And, the other things in life, just because you have health problems, they don't cease to happen. They don't take a break either, right? So we've had kids that have had health problems. We've had all kinds of things come up, and we'll touch on some of that. But all the regular stuff still happens, even as you've had this life-altering, chronic illness, chronic pain. But I want to just kind of touch base on schedule, so you'll just kind of see we're here obviously till about noon today. And let's see. Oh, okay. I see what I changed the title of that because I'm kind of combining our story with this unexpected story, Broken and Mended, which they're inextricably linked. And so we'll share about that first. We're not on a strict timeline in terms of when I got to switch to the next session or anything. I think somewhere in the middle, I might give us a quick stretch and bathroom break if anyone needs it. But if anyone needs to go to the bathroom at any time or get up, feel free to do that. Feel free to get coffee, get donuts. We're going to do, but not without hope, how hope diminishes, or how hope grows when our bodies diminish. And then I'll do a session a little bit kind of with ministry emphasizes helping the hurting, how to be a blessing to your hurting family and friends, and some things that I'll share from my perspective and perspective of a few others that have been in this situation. So that's what we'll cover today, and then tomorrow, if you're able to come, I figure most of you are part of this church, but I know I met a few of you that weren't, and so. But we'll be doing this tomorrow. Where at 10 o'clock, I'm going to share kind of what the mission and future of Broken and Mended is in Bible class. And the sermon will be why the church needs its hurting members. Notice the way that's worded. It's not why hurting members need the church. We need to remind the church why they need their hurting members. And so that's what we'll emphasize, tomorrow for that. So I'm going to talk about our story for just a moment. Kind of a couple snapshots in time there. The first one's at White Sands National Park in New Mexico. And it was in New Mexico when all this started for me, my struggles. And that one there, you see, I think it's from Thanksgiving last year. So my family changed a little bit now. The little boy in the white, let me see here. Yeah, the Superman t-shirt. He's now a sophomore at Oklahoma Christian. And the boy behind him is now a senior at Oklahoma State. And then the little girl you see there, where her face is covered up by the cap, she is now a junior in high school. So some time has passed, and you can kind of see, what we look like there. But my story begins where most people's story begins, and that was good health. And as a matter of fact, in 2011, I started, this is in Portales, New Mexico, and, close to the, time that Mike and I briefly overlapped there. But I got involved in Taekwondo. And I got involved in Taekwondo in part because when I was a kid growing up, I was involved in it pretty heavily. So my dad actually eventually got his black belt and even took over the school that we first started at. I got all the way up to a red belt, which in our particular system was one underneath black belt. And for me, actually, I regretted not finishing and getting my black belt. I got a little distracted as I got into high school and involved in football and had different interests, come up, and kind of left that behind. So I kind of regretted not ever getting my black belt. So my plan was to get back into Taekwondo and to, chase that black belt that I missed out when I was a kid. And I had no other health issues at this time other than I had high cholesterol for whatever reason. Since I was 19 when they first tested it, that had been a problem. But at the same time, I was preparing to run a 10K in our town, and they have that every year. It's called Heritage Days, and so they would have a 10K race. I'd never run anything of that distance before, and really at that time I hadn't run anything in years. But I went all in, said I'm going to run this 10K. I'm going to be in Taekwondo, and also as a consequence of all that, I dropped about 8 pounds of weight, which I very much needed to do. And so I never felt more in control of my health and feeling like I could do whatever in March of 2011. So I was a preacher at that time too, at the Third
Oh, well.
Church of Christ. Oh, he might have to be muted. Yeah. So, as you saw in the picture, I had 3 children under the age of 7 when we first got there. And so we were also busy and active in all the ways that you'd expect a family with young kids to be. But as I mentioned, this all kind of also tied back into my childhood. So when I got involved in Taekwondo again, well, I'll come back to that in a minute. I started over as a white belt, but I wasn't your typical white belt. So because muscle memory is really interesting, because even though it had been since I was a teenager, since I had, been involved in that kind of stuff, things were going really well for me, very fast. Except for one particular thing that I didn't think much of at the time is that my hips were not very flexible at all. And I mean, really, they wouldn't hardly move. I don't know if you know the stretch called a butterfly. You pull your feet in together and you push down on your knees to push down to the ground. Well, mine wouldn't move at all. And I thought that's kind of weird, but I also thought, man, I'll just stretch that out over time. Well, one day we're doing side kicks, and if you know anything about side kicks or martial arts, you have to have a plant leg, and so your one leg's kicking, the other leg you're planted on, and on that plant leg you are rotating that hip to get power in the kick. I actually always thought I was pretty good at side kicks, so I was doing that full gusto that day, and my left hip I felt a very sharp pain, and I thought, okay, I must have just pulled a muscle. That was just all I thought had happened. And again, because I thought I was inflexible. 2 days later, I did the same thing in my right hip. And probably at that time, I should have known that there was an indicator something more serious was wrong. But I wasn't very smart about those things, so I didn't. And in fact, I didn't even stop doing Taekwondo. I just tried to protect the hips a little bit more, not kick as high. And I still wanted to run the 10K, and it didn't really hurt me to run at that time because your hips are pointed in one direction. I wasn't having to rotate on them. But anytime I was doing anything that caused me to have to rotate on those hips, it was hurting. But our school in the summer, they were on the school kind of the school schedule there, because our Taekwondo instructor. He was like a 7th degree black belt. He also worked at the university in town, and so we take a break in the summer anyway. And the 10K was over in early June, so I did run that. I was very proud of that. But then I decided it's going to shut that down. It's going to shut everything down for about 2 months before Taekwondo started again. And I thought if they were pulled muscles or strained muscles or whatever, they would heal during that time. And so it got to be, I guess, sometime in August. We were up in Ruidoso, New Mexico, so up in the mountains. And I decided it was a good time for me to kind of test out, how I was doing. And as soon as I started to do anything, I realized it was as if I had not rested them a single day. And so I realized then it was not just muscular and that I was dealing with something a little bit worse. I didn't know how much worse. And it was during this time really that I had got a lot of bad advice from people, and including doctors. And so I had one doctor, my general practitioner, who kind of laughed at me and told me I didn't do sickness well, whatever that meant. And then there's a sports doctor in town who was pretty well known, pretty well respected, and he decided that I shouldn't change what I was doing, keep going to Taekwondo, and he told me to, he gave me these physical therapy exercises to do at home. So I was doing all this and I kept getting worse. And then he suggested that it was, this is all in my head. In fact, I remember when we said, can we get a referral to an orthopedic surgeon? His response, yeah, you can, but it's not going to change anything, and so, but meanwhile, a lot of other people who didn't have any medical knowledge were, telling me, well, it's not really your hips, it's your back, and you need to go to a chiropractor. Well, I was desperate to try anything. I'm not a person, I get nervous at chiropractors, and just to be honest, I'm just not very comfortable. My wife has gone to chiropractors, pretty much her whole life, and she always feels better. I usually try not to go to them, but in this particular case, I did go. And nothing was getting better. It was getting worse and worse. And I remember one particular, so we had a tournament, like a Taekwondo tournament, and there was only one other guy in my age group. And so I was guaranteed at least second place. We were going to spar. We also did the like what they call the kind of like kata competition, where you do like the different forms and stuff. Well, I won that one, but on the tournament where we actually fought each other, I could not at that time kick any higher than maybe my waist at best. This guy was 6'5". Um, and so I could not kick him above the thigh, which coincidentally was not a point. So I lost that. And that was, but it's kind of funny looking back on it. But on the other hand, it was also discouraging because at that point I'm realizing that I can't continue to do this, no matter what people are telling me to do. And so December, I took my last belt test, and the one criticism I got on the belt test was from one of the judges who said, "Well, you're not kicking high enough." And I said, "I understand that. I can't. I can't kick any higher than what I'm able to do right now." So all that kind of I came to that realization I was going to have to quit. And so I made it eventually to an orthopedic surgeon in Albuquerque. And there was a little stop in Amarillo too that really helped, which they immediately saw that the sports doctor in Portales didn't know what he was talking about. And eventually I did get diagnosed with something. It's like cam and pincer impingement. It just means that I had extra bone growth in my hips. And so when I was rotating on those hips, it was cutting into the labral there. And so every time I was doing that kind of activity, I was making it worse and worse. And so this guy in Albuquerque was an orthopedic surgeon that specialized in arthroscopic, hip surgery, which wasn't very common at that time. Most back in those days, it was more people got hip replacements if they had hip troubles. But this was something short of that. They could just repair. They could repair the labral. They could shave off all that extra bone. And so he did so. He told my wife after the surgery that it was one of the worst labral tears that he'd ever seen. And so it was bad. But what I remember too is that in our first meeting with him, he was looking at the X-rays, and he just looking at that, he said, and I remember quoting, "Something's not right." And so what he was talking about was that I had this my SI joints. You're supposed to have a little space there, like you do in all your joints. And mine were looking like they were fusing together. And that's really the first time I ever heard the term ankylosing spondylitis. Well, to be more accurate, I had heard the term because I had a guy in my church that had that. But I didn't know anything about the term, and I probably couldn't have come up with it off the top of my head. And I don't know if any of you ever heard of that or not, or known some people that have it. But it is a inflammatory autoimmune arthritic disease that normally starts in your SI joints. And if you don't treat it, you can kind of see by the picture there, it will work its way up the spine and eventually fuse the spine. We won't be able to bend it anymore. And this was also happening in my hips. I think it was very likely the cause of the hip impingement issues I had as well, which I didn't have as a child. So most of the time when you have those issues, it's something you're born with, basically. In my case, that was not the case. So something had happened that had caused that issue. Well, I still got the surgery on the left hip, and I thought that, it was going to still give me back some of my life, but I didn't recover very well from that surgery. because this surgery and everything that was going on actually kind of triggered the disease to go into, kind of a hyperdrive. And I remember for the first time then that my lower back, especially sitting down, began to bother me a lot. And when we went to a rheumatologist, she was in the room with us 5, 10 minutes maybe. And she said, "Yeah, you have ankylosing spondylitis." And I remember this time was very disorienting, because next thing I know, she's telling me you're going to need this weekly injection. It was a pin injection. Just push the pin and it push the little button and injects you, and it's going to be a weekly injection. It was Enbrel. And they're super expensive. So you had to go through their kind of copay assistant program. And but I just was not ready for even believing that all that was going to be necessary. And she's telling me that, "Oh, you may have to do this for the rest of your life." And I'm thinking, "You got to be kidding." And I just hurt my hips in Taekwondo, and I want to get better. But I wasn't getting better. I did not recover from the surgery very well. My insurance, by the way, that we bought was the minimum, because when we moved to Portales, I was healthy, and I was at no risk of getting pregnant. So Katie had the more expensive policy. I just had this kind of emergency policy, basically. Well, they wouldn't even pay for physical therapy after surgery, and so I remember we went to I went to two physical therapy appointments, paid for them both out of pocket, and then just tried to do the rest of it on my own at home. And that's probably part of the reason why I struggled to recover, along with just the extra inflammation. And so I recognized my life was not going to look the same going forward. And a lot of the plans and dreams that I had, were kind of, wiped out, because I forgot to mention that. And I also wanted to be a church planter. And my big plan was that I was going to move to, after I got my black belt, I was going to move to a city. I was going to start my own school. And I was going to use that kind of as my network of people to kind of establish a church. I don't know many people that use martial arts to plant churches, but that was going to be my plan anyway. And none of that. I mean, I was all out the window at this point. And things then got worse for me again in 2013. I began to have significant GI issues. And I never got better from it. It just kept getting worse and worse. There was a lot of time in the bathroom, and some of that time was lying on the floor in pain. And so I finally had to go get another specialist, this time a GI. He ran all the tests that GIs run, and he found some things I think even surprised him. And by the way, my brother had Crohn's disease, so I mean there was reasons to suspect that could be an issue. But he found eosinophils in my colon and in my esophagus. And eosinophils are something we all have. They're white blood cells that are responsive to allergies. I don't understand this on a scientific level. I just know that they're not supposed to be in your tissues. So, and they're especially not supposed to be in your colon, because that's a very rare thing. It's called eosinophilic colitis. And he began to suspect, since I had him in both places, that I also had my liver. Went and got a biopsy on my liver, and it came back stage 2 fibrosis of the liver, and stage 4 is cirrhosis. And I think, as I understand, it's irreversible. And we didn't know why that was happening. And because he suspected that I might have a more general disease called eosinophilia, which means these eosinophils are going everywhere, and they can impact your organs. He said, "Well, you guys need to go to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota." And I'm thinking, really? I mean, this again, it was hard for me during that time. I heard Mike was talking yesterday at dinner about Fazoli's, and kind of how that was a place they like to go. Fazoli's in Amarillo was where we debriefed all of these crazy doctor appointments I would have. And we would go to Fazoli's and eat as many breadsticks as we could, and try to, it's kind of a comfort food. But it was a difficult, time. And going to Mayo, I'm kind of bad about this, because I Google a lot when I probably shouldn't. And, so stuff like autoimmune liver disease, potential liver transplant, all this kind of stuff's kind of popping up. Oh, and by the way, eosinophilia can affect the heart and kill you. And so this had gone from a strained hip muscle, I thought, to, now going to the Mayo Clinic in a pretty short period of time. Katie kind of had a different way of processing this. And this is all in 2013. So all this started in 2011. So 2013, fall of 2013 as when I was going to be going to the Mayo Clinic. And I was going to let Katie just reflect a little bit kind of on her experience and while this was happening, kind of what was going through her head and how she was processing it, because she does it quite a bit different than I do.
Watch the tripwires.
Yeah.
Yeah. Alrighty. So I think this kind of backs up a little bit for me, and I'll tell briefly, but while I was in high school, Larry and Diane will remember that I spent my sophomore year, I missed about half the year. I had I was sick all the time, and the doctors couldn't really figure out what was going on there. It kind of turned out that my immune system had just gotten kind of wiped out, and so I was just catching everything. So I went through that year where I just was missing out on tons of things and didn't really know what was happening. Of course, we were in Kenya, so my parents like, do we need to go back to the States? Like, what's going on here? I ended up in the hospital once, and it was pretty serious. It was a pseudomonas, and thankfully we had a really great doctor that caught it and kind of saved my life at that point. But I think through that, I came out thinking, I can't control a lot of things in my life. I mean, I'm a high schooler, but I came out with this lesson that I can't control a lot of things in my life. I believe that God does have control of it, whatever that looks like. And so I kind of that's how I approach life. And so when David was going through all of this, like you said, he was Googling, and I'm like, I can't go there. Like, I just have to stay more in God's got control of this. And so we're going to be okay. And I'm going to deal with it. Maybe I'm more of a, Scarlett O'Hara type. So when the time comes and I have to face it, I will be ready to do so, but I'm not going to face it until I have to. So I don't know, that's my coping mechanism, lots of faith. I don't know. I like to lean on that one more than just that I like to avoid all things. But I do think sometimes it was hard because he needed to kind of go down that rabbit hole. And I was like, I really don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But we eventually learned to be able to communicate that with each other and hopefully kind of meet in the middle. But that was Mayo. We have some more story we'll tell later today about our children and things we've gone through. But is that
good?
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Katie's more efficient with words than I am. But I was a preacher for 20 years. And I do probably need to pick up the pace a little bit. You know, what's weird about Mayo, have you ever had a situation where your car's acting up and you take it to the mechanic and it won't act up anymore? You know, well, I kind of had that happen to me at Mayo. They did confirm the earlier biopsy, so it wasn't that the GI was wrong, but when they re-ran the test at Mayo, it was none of it was there. You know, the eosinophils were gone. At the time, I just again was disoriented by that too. Like, well, do we need to go to Mayo? But we didn't know. And so I think it was good that we went. But I look back on it now as a time where maybe if I've experienced healing on this journey, it was during that time. You know, that some of the worst outcomes that we were concerned about turned out not to be the case. I mean, the stage 2 fibrosis of the liver was concerning, but it seemed to be unrelated to the autoimmune stuff, which is really good. In fact, that over time, that liver damage has been reversed, which just had to do with what's commonly called fatty liver disease, you know, and most people can have that and have no symptoms and no difficulty. In my case, it just wasn't true. For whatever reason, my liver would just take that on and basically damage itself. And so so that was good news. I did lead with the Crohn's diagnosis. So they did say, well, you have something going on. We think it's beginning of Crohn's disease for you. And so that was something else to kind of add to the ankylosing spondylitis. And really, we kind of entered into a new normal after going to Mayo, where we're just dealing with ankylosing spondylitis and Crohn's. And for a while, we're able to manage all that pretty well, you know, with the medicines that I'm taking. And so it wasn't life like it used to be, but it also wasn't maybe at that time as bad as I thought it could have been or would have been. And certainly at that time, I had no notion in my mind that one day I would be starting and running a chronic illness and pain ministry. I thought the worst was behind me. But let's see what I got here. So I should have showed you that earlier. Yeah, so I should mention and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because those of you who've been through this know how this works, but for the first 3 years that we were dealing with this, we had over $10,000 each year in out-of-pocket medical expenses. Not premiums, out-of-pocket medical expenses in addition to premiums. It was and we're still living with the consequences of that. And it's once it gets out ahead of you like that, you can't hardly ever catch up because then other stuff is happening. My son Josiah had 2 eye surgeries. He had to have oral surgery, which was much more than your regular oral surgery because he was kind of like a shark. He had all these extra set of teeth that he had to get removed. Katie had a surgery or 2 in there, and so all that stuff. It's all my kids need braces, of course, and so all that stuff's going on too, and we just couldn't catch up. So I just bring that up not so you feel sorry for me, but because I think it's relatable for a lot of people with their medical expenses.
People don't realize that health insurance isn't there for your benefit.
Right. It's for the health insurance companies.
Benefit your shareholders and your executives.
Yeah. Well, when you go through something like this, you do kind of start to realize that because, it's difficult. And that, if I had to be honest, of all things that I've dealt with in this journey, this has impacted me the most emotionally because sometimes you blame yourself or I'm not saying that you should do. I'm just saying you go through those emotions. And it's just been something that's been very difficult for me. So in the summer of 2015, we were on a vacation in Corpus Christi. It was a fun vacation. And we were actually in Padre, but went over to Corpus Christi. We had friends that had a condo there, let us stay there for free. My kids were still at a very fun age, so we're playing out in the ocean, going swimming at the swimming pool too, and just having a good time. But for whatever reason, on that trip, I began to hurt significantly more than I had previously. And so it ended up being a flare that did not subside. And what I mean by not subsiding, it went on for like 2.5 years, after that. So this is when things became very difficult. As a preacher, you have to do a lot of sitting when you're writing your sermons, your Bible classes, reading commentaries, books, when you're visiting with people or going on trips to see people in a hospital. By the way, no one hardly ever went to the hospital locally for us because we're a small town. And so it was always 2 hours to Amarillo, 1.5 hours to Lubbock, or even for myself, 2 hours to Amarillo, and then 3.5 hours or Albuquerque to see my orthopedic surgeon. Going anywhere more than 15 minutes became really difficult. And every day I would just get through the day by basically fantasizing that if I could get to a certain point in the day, 5:30, whatever it was, I could go home and then I could just lay sideways on the couch, and then that way I could alleviate some of the pain that was building up in my back. And during this time too, I also took a mission trip to Shanghai. With a Let's Start Talking team, if any of you are familiar with Let's Start Talking. But that was a 15-hour plane ride, which I still consider to be 15 of some of the most miserable hours of my life, And the way back was bad too, but for some reason I just remember it more going. Just how horrible that was, how much pain I was in, and essentially carried that pain to some degree with me while I was on the trip itself. In 2016, my right hip, so this is the one I didn't have surgery on, and I put it off because of the way I responded to the first surgery on the left hip, it began to hurt more. So I was facing another surgery, and I began really, with that everyday grind, to feel very isolated, and I began to feel depressed, to be honest with you. I just was struggling, and so I started searching for a Christian resources that, Christian resources for people that are dealing with chronic pain and chronic illness. You just kind of see, some of the cycle here that you go through with, I don't know why I say brain injury, but maybe that, but anyway, this kind of relates to just the process to going through pain and the cycle it goes through, and you end up there with depression and low mood. I was definitely there. And I couldn't find anything that was Christian based for chronic pain. No support groups or anything like that. No curriculum for that sort of thing. So I began to, I don't want to jump too far ahead there. I did not begin to make a plan for anything at that time until in October 2016. I preached a sermon, and I finally decided I was going to tell the church. I mean, they knew about the health journey, but I finally told the church how this was impacting me. And that day, we did a traditional invitation, and we had 4 other people, and myself included, so 5, that responded to the invitation, asked for prayers for chronic illness and chronic pain. And I'm pretty sure that all of those other people I didn't even know were dealing with it. They had kept it to themselves, and it was at that time I really felt that God kind of planted the seed for what became, Broken and Mended. I knew I was kind of near my end of my time in New Mexico at that point. So that was 2016. Broken and Mended didn't start till 2018. So in the years that followed that time period, we did move to Woodward, in Oklahoma, so Northwest Oklahoma. And things got better after a while, not right away, but things did get a little bit more manageable. I did have to have right hip replacement surgery in 2022. So that was, to me, felt pretty significant to be doing that. And I think at the time I was, 47 or 46 years old or whatever. And left one is likely to have to be replaced at some time as well, at least in the not too distant future. But I'm doing better right now. I'm really doing quite well. I'm not pain-free, but I'm doing quite well. And so I try to take advantage of this window of time to put as much energy into what I feel like God wants me to do as I can, because you never know when you're not going to have that opportunity anymore. I do want to close. Well, it's kind of a close, but we're going to just flow right into the next session because we're going to tell you a little bit more about Broken and Mended. I thought this was helpful, and I related to it, sort of this chronic pain in God. I mentioned how disoriented we felt in the first stage. And then of course, afterwards, you realize I got something going on. You do pray for healing. And a lot of people, pray for healing, and people can pray for healing as you never want to discourage that. But I think you went off mute again, and so, because that's something we struggle with, right? But sometimes we come to a point where you accept that healing is not imminent. I came to that point, where I felt like, well, God's answer is not right now. You need to trust me in this journey. And so that's something that doesn't really go very well with the prosperity gospel preachers and so forth. This idea that God might want you to carry a burden like this in life in order to be faithful to Him, to be a witness to His faithfulness throughout this process. But I have found that certainly to be true in my life. But as you lose your dreams, you kind of lose your sense of purpose as well. But eventually, at least for me, I found new purpose in what has manifested in my case into the ministry that I have now. I'll pause there. If you have any questions for me or for Katie for this part of our journey, and I'm going to transition here in a moment to kind of the Broken and Mended side of this story. Anybody got anything?
I have a question.
Sure.
So I understand the autoimmune portion. My husband has MS, but I'm the one who has, like, for several reasons, like the hip and back issues. And so mine is different from yours because, as far as I know, thus far, mine isn't autoimmune. Does light exercise help you feel better? Like, do you feel worse if you're more sedentary?
Actually, I do feel worse if I'm more sedentary, up to a point. I mean, if I do too much physically, then I'll pay a price for that too. So there's kind of a fine balance there. But yeah, staying active somewhat does help. And the more I sit, that's why traveling can be so difficult. These flights I took to get here because I'm doing better, they were just tolerable enough for me. Had they been any longer, it would have been really difficult just because of all the sitting and all that. So yeah, for me, and actually keeps my joints from stiffening up, which then leads to, if not careful, they can actually fuse. And so, yeah, movement is good for me, but high impact stuff like running, or
I'm not 20 or 30 anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, everyone's different though. I mean, there are certain types of injuries that are that's one of the ways sometimes when something different is going on, because if you have an injury and you move it and it hurts, at least it makes sense. But if you don't even know, if you didn't have a particular injury and you're noticing that it's getting worse while you're sitting still, well, that's usually an indication, whether autoimmune or not, that something more significant is, going on there. Yeah. And by the way, I use the terms chronic illness and chronic pain interchangeably. I do want to acknowledge that some people have chronic illness that doesn't manifest itself as pain, and there are others that have chronic pain that don't necessarily have a chronic illness, but they've had an injury or something like that. But so there's a lot of overlap, but I just kind of use those interchangeably. In my case, they go together. All right, I've got to find my next. Okay, I found it. My eyesight here is not what it used to be either, so can't sometimes see what I'm opening on my Kindle here. All right, anything else for kind of talk about broken and mended? So that's kind of the foundation for how this came about. I do want to tell you just a little story about Josiah. So he was born on, you see there, January 27th, 2004. And like he's our firstborn. So, like every parent, we were excited, what it's going to be like to have a baby. And we were taking these parenting classes so we could be so prepared, for what was coming. I knew how to change a diaper and all that stuff, and so, we're like any parent, we were excited. And Josiah got here. Came into the world with a little trouble, actually. He was breached, so Katie had to get a C-section, which coincidentally, she had a hard time healing up from that, and we had medical bills from that too. But that's not really this part of the story that's important to us today. Josiah, very early on, maybe 2-3 weeks in, he began crying a lot. And I mean a lot, and not just kind of whimpering, I mean screaming, pulling into a little ball, turning red in the face. And we were, it was a lot to handle. So I know that kind of the way it would work is Katie was now staying at home with Josiah. I was going to work, and I would come home. Katie would hand baby off to me. She would retreat in the bedroom and go cry. It was that bad. Turned out he had something called, acid reflux disease. And it was something we were told he would most likely grow out of, but for about 6 months, we didn't get that happy baby stage. And going through this though, there was a time where we were in Oklahoma. We were living in Texas at the time, but we were up in Oklahoma City for a work-related event, and Josiah was in the car seat, just screaming as loud as he can. Here we are, Oklahoma traffic and Oklahoma City traffic. Most Oklahoma didn't have real traffic. Oklahoma City has some traffic, but it's just screaming. And I just remember telling Katie at that time, that if we're going to go through this, if we're going to go through it anyway, then I want it to count for something. I want it to be able, God to use it in some way. And so I actually want to ask Katie to come up and say just a little bit about that, because God did end up using this for something. And I think it planted a seed for what later would come about through this chronic pain, chronic illness.
Yeah, so like David mentioned, we read the books. There was nothing in the books about what this baby was doing. And some babies spit up, and that's acid reflux, and they actually get relief from it. But he didn't. It just went up and down and up and down. So he really was in pain for a lot of the day. And so when we kind of, lots of people had lots of ideas for us, which is another part of that. You have things like, have you tried this? Have you done? I mean, one time a lady came up to David at church and he's crying. He's letting me sit in church, and the lady says, well, have you fed him?
I never thought of that.
And so, people are trying to be well-meaning. We understand that, but it was hard, and, to relate to anybody. And so when we kind of got over a little hump, or we had found the right combination of things that at least relieved some of his pain, and we were actually able to go on a mission trip to Japan when he was 5 months old, we were kind of seeing that light at the end of the tunnel. At that point, we were able to let people know, like, if you need to talk, we understand this. And so I would have moms, through word of mouth, people were like, well, you need to talk to Katie Heflin. You need to just talk to the Heflins because they've been through this. They've been through it. So for me, I always felt like the light at the end of the tunnel message is always nice. But like when I'm in the tunnel, I need you to crawl in the tunnel with me and sit in the dark.
Yes.
Because that's where I am. I mean, yes, it's nice that I know in 3 months this is going to pass, but right now I'm needing comfort where I'm at. And so it was really nice. I think we probably talked to half a dozen or more other parents that were going through this, and we were able to just be reassuring and sure share some things that maybe worked for us, or just say we understand, like we get what you're going through, and comfort them in some way. Like just I slept on an angle, and his mother, my mother-in-law, we had to strap him in because the bed was on an angle. And so she just thought it looked so horrible that her little grandbaby was strapped in. I was like, well, yeah, we don't want him at the bottom of the crib either. So, lots of things that we went through, but I feel like it was connecting with other people helped us to feel better about the pain that we had gone through as well. So that was an experience that relates a little bit to Broken and Mended.
Yeah, as Katie said, obviously Josiah, he did, he got better. And he's totally fine, healthy, young man today and everything. And but that thing that I said, if we're going to go through this, I want it to count for something. Is something that I think it was an idea planted in my heart. And at some point, with going through this chronic illness and pain, that just I had that sense of wanting to find purpose in it and wanting God to do something in it. If I was going to go through it anyway, then I wanted to go through it with God, and I wanted it to count in some way, to mean something to somebody, that God use it, in some way. So that's how Broken and Mended kind of got started. Some of you asked, how did I get involved in Broken and Mended? Well, I started it. And so we moved to Woodward in 2017. This is our old logo design here, but I still like it because it's nostalgic for me. And also my best friend created it. And then later Chris died in a motorcycle accident. And so for me, I thought I got to kind of almost hold on to that. And it's still in our new design too, sort of, but he's the one that came up with that logo. So in 2018, started to make plans, and there's some providential things that happened during that time that kind of sped up the planning stage. I won't get into all that just for sake of time right now, but in the fall of 2018, we launched a Facebook group. In September 2018, we had our first support group meeting. I will say with that first support group meeting, when you start something like this, you don't know if people are going to respond to it, if they're going to think it's really helpful to them, because it's brand new, right? And so we had no curriculum, and so I was just kind of writing it as we went. But I remember that first meeting very well. And we were already using Zoom, so it was before COVID, and but we would have people that were connecting virtually. We had one lady that would often join us from hospital rooms, and but she was always so awesome because she'd been dealing with it for like 40 something years, and it could really speak into people's pain and suffering. But I just remember a lot of hugs, a lot of tears, a lot of people saying, I've never been with a group of people that just got it when I started to say what I was going through. And so that was really the value of it. Yes, we were trying to create kind of a devotional and discussion that went along with each of these sessions. But I always felt that the most valuable part really was the community aspect of it, and knowing that you're not alone. So our theme in Broken and Mended, our mission statement, is connecting hurting people to Jesus and each other. And as probably people with chronic illness, chronic pain can become very isolated from sometimes everyone in their lives, and even sometimes family members will abandon them and all that. So it's always central to our message is you're not alone. God's not left you. You got other people to be with you. And so that's Broken and Mended got started. I just want to explain the bowl a little bit. Kintsugi bowl, and maybe some of you have heard about that. It's a Japanese art form where you take a broken vessel of some kind, in this case a bowl, and you mend it together with gold. The idea is that instead of trying to hide the scars, the scars are there, but it becomes more beautiful than it was before. And so I was reading a book at that time. It's been retitled, but I think you can still find it under the old title. It's called Kiss the Wave by Dave Furman. And I may say a little bit more about Dave Furman later, but I just want to quote what he said in his book, because this kind of helped. He didn't say the words broken and mended, but it definitely planted the idea for those words. He said, I think I got the quote up here. Where's Lynetta Dow? She's the person that was zooming in from the hospital room. She's passed away now, but she's just kind of an inspiration. I like to talk about Lynetta a lot. Okay, but here's a quote from Dave Furman. Similar to the Japanese art of kintsugi, our rough edges and cracks are filled with gold to point to the greatness of God. the philosophy behind the art is not to build a new piece, but instead to understand its history and repair the old piece. It looks similar to the old forms, but is now more glorious. This is what God does in our trials. Our scars are not things to run from or hide from others, and through them we exalt the one who is conforming us more and more into the image of Christ. And so that just resonated with me, and I think it's resonated with a lot of people since we got started. Well, you know about COVID-19. Well, the only thing I'll say about that is, you're trying to launch a support group ministry, which at least part of it there is involved with meeting in person. And we started it in 2018, and COVID-19 it comes from 2019, and so very shortly we had to shut down our in-person meetings and just meet virtually only. But this actually, COVID wasn't a good thing, but this was a good thing for our ministry because it caused us to start connecting with people all over the place. So we have people from Hawaii, we have people from Baltimore, so we kind of coast to coast. They're now coming in to these support group meetings, and that's remained a part of who we are, ever since then. Yeah, I had people in the UK. So COVID-19 was a challenge for Broken and Mended, but it was not our doom, and I do know a couple of support groups that tried to get started during this time that it didn't work out because of COVID-19, but at least overall things kind of went along. So in 2021 we started we incorporated as a nonprofit, so we had a board of directors. We did this because we did not just want to be a local church ministry at one church. It's a local church ministry, but hopefully at lots of different places around the world. And this, you see a cover of one of our books. You can look through some of our books back there to display when you have an opportunity. We created a leader's guide. This is a second edition of that, so it's not what our original looked like exactly, but this is what we're using now. And the leader's guide, of course, was the group sessions for the group meetings. But we also had a participants guide, is what we called it at the time. And that was obviously for the group participants. We later retitled it to Reflection Guide. And what we're trying to, and so the reflection guide was for at-home stuff. So the session, you'd have your meeting, and then in between meetings, you could kind of work through some additional reflection and thoughts and scriptures and all that on your own. But that's basically what we needed to have these support groups to make them possible. We need to continue to work on the training aspect of this, and we're still working on that, but that's what we needed to at least get it started. This is, you can kind of see an in-person picture here, but also just from a real meeting. And so you can see kind of the blurred background there, someone that's joining on Zoom. I actually know who that person is, even though it's blurred, and she was joining from Hawaii, and this meeting was in Woodward, Oklahoma. So that was, I thought that was a pretty cool deal. Broken and Mended category. So I ended up figuring 5 different categories I felt like related to chronic illness, chronic pain, and our faith. And so each of our sessions some way relate to one of these categories. So one is community, where we're emphasizing how we're together. You're not alone. We're bearing one another's burdens, all the things that you would emphasize about community. Identity is important because, sometimes people, because it's so consuming what they're going through, and pain is so demanding of our attention, especially when it's really bad, people can start to feel like their disease or their pain is their identity. And this, for a Christian, is not true. It's not true for anyone, but as a Christian, we understand that our identity is in people created in the image of God, redeemed by Christ, who are a new creature in Christ, new creation in Christ. And so we want to emphasize that to people. We want them to feel free to talk about their disease, but sometimes people mistake what we're doing. I've had people not join our groups and think, well, I don't want that to be my identity. Well, that's exactly what we're trying to teach. Is it's not your identity. Laments. I'll say a little bit more about lament later, but it's very, very important. People need to cry out to God, and we don't encourage that a lot in our churches in general. So Broken and Mended feels we need to do that. Spiritual formation. Guess what? You're still a disciple of Jesus when you have chronic illness and chronic pain. In fact, you in some ways can grow in ways that you never could have had that not come into your life. And so we're still wanting people to understand how they can grow in that regard. special topics, kind of your catch-all thing. So like for a holiday, for example, I might do something, on Christmas and chronic pain, or we did one for Easter, obviously emphasizing the resurrection in that case. But it could cover something like chronic illness and finances, or chronic illness and mental health. And so anything that maybe didn't fit in those other four kind of would fit into that special topic category. So that's basically what our books emphasize. Yeah, I'm going to talk about Kenya here in just a moment. So things grew pretty slowly in the U.S. Granted that it was during the height of COVID when all this was happening. But in Kenya, we had someone write me that had a kind of an old connection to, it kind of traces back to there's Katie and her family's time in Kenya, that this connection ended up happening. And so he wrote me and he asked me, his name was Paul, and Paul asked him, hey, can we do this in Kenya? And I thought, well, I don't see why not, And so I literally packed up a box of materials and sent it to him. I think it was like 6 weeks later when he got it, but he did eventually get it. And he started a support group, and somehow then he started 3, and then he had 6. And at that time, I told Paul, I said, Paul, you cannot have 6 support groups. We need to get other leaders to do this. So he went out and got other leaders. One of those leaders eventually went across the country to some kind of preaching school. And these people in the preaching school were from all over Kenya. And he tells them about Broken and Mended. And then all of a sudden, Broken and Mended is going all across Kenya geographically. And it's hard to keep up with. Larry was asking yesterday how many groups we have. I don't already know the official number. It would be a conservative estimate to say that we've had 250 support groups in Kenya. Doesn't mean all of those are active or all of those were successful, but there have literally been hundreds and therefore thousands of people in Kenya that have been touched by Broken and Mended. So the picture that you see is from 2024. So last summer, Katie and I went to Kenya, went with another married couple as well to kind of go and see the work for ourselves, and we were really blown away by that experience. And I'm going to ask Katie to come up here again and kind of share what her observations were of this time. For me, I'll just say it was incredibly humbling to see that something that was written in American in English, and a lot of them speak English very well there. Not all of them, but a lot of them do. But it was in English. It was written in an American context, and somehow they were able to adapt this and run with it way further than we had, here in the U.S. It was mind-blowing to me, and it was just something that I knew had to be the work of God because it was something I had never envisioned.
And so I think, like David said, we were pretty humbled. I think I'm a little bit more of a skeptical person by nature, and from my dad. So, but so we were hearing about all this work and all these groups and I'm like, hey, this is really happening. This is really, and because of course it's across the world. And so I was anxious with David to get to go to Kenya and to see, and just right away, I think just the way they can talk about how much is impacting them. And I think part of the reason is they are very open to talking and being honest and not trying to put a facade on something that maybe we are more likely to do. And so that openness and that willingness and the integration of needing God for their daily needs, it has just resonated wonderfully there. I mean, and so even though maybe not everybody in the group has what we would call as a defined chronic illness, probably because they can't get diagnosed, most likely, but just the encouragement and the connection. I think a lot of them have talked about how they did feel isolated. They didn't know that other people were having the same struggle. And so the encouragement they receive from one another, plus they're willing to meet every day if they wanted to. And so, we have 19 sessions, or it was like they went through them way faster than we thought they would. So that's been kind of an issue, trying to get more material. But I think for us, it was really overwhelming and humbling to see how much something that David wrote is encouraging so many people, and they're sharing it with people. It's so easy to share with people, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, I have 6 more friends. I want to share this with them. And so we really are, it's grown way faster than we anticipated, which I think David may speak to, that we knew God's hand was in that, because that was not on our radar to be something that we were going to be doing. So.
picture is from a group member seminar that we hosted. What was interesting about this is in a rural town in a field of a preacher's house. They got the tent set up, and it's difficult to travel in Kenya in a lot of places. It's difficult to travel in this particular area we were in because we were about an hour from a kind of the major part of Kisumu, the city there, where Larry and Diane know very well. But we had about 250 people come out to this field, many of them with disability, chronic pain, illness. I mean, it was, to me, that was the highlight of the trip that particular day. It was also the most tiring, which sometimes those go together, but it was really exciting. So, by the way, we have continued to grow. Why does it do that? That doesn't look normal, does it? Okay, I'm going to have to skip that slide. That's a testimony from a lady by the name of Eunice Ngoje, which Larry and Diane and Katie already knew. And we're a little short on time. Not that I like to cut out the testimony part because I feel like that's important for you to hear from some other people. But right now, that's not looking like I can do anything about it. Well,
Try clicking on it.
I'm waiting for that hand to show up again. Where is it? Oh.
David, do you want to take a quick break? We'll look at it.
Let me do the break here in just a second. Let me see if I can get off of this. Now I can't get off screen at all. Isn't technology great?
Sometimes technology is chronic pain.
Yeah. Let's take, like Katie said, let's take a 5-minute break. But let's try to keep it to 5 minutes if possible. So stretch your legs and you go to the restroom real quick or get something to drink. Okay. I'm going to play this video here from Eunice. She's got really good English, but of course it's accented different than you're used to hearing. So there are subtitles there. Hopefully we'll be able to see those. I'll try to go full screen once I get going here. Let's see.
Bay County, Kenya. I'm a mother of 4, and I'm a Christian.
Oh,
Now I want to share something on Broken and Mended, a group which I was introduced to by Brother Paul when I shared with him some of my challenges in life. So I grew up as a child in good health. I went to school, I got married, I gave birth to my 3 children normally, but my last child, I gave birth to CS. So after the surgery, I developed complications that has really given me a lot of problems and pain in life. So I think it was not done well, and thereafter, I developed a complication of hip bone pain, chest pain, and abdominal pain. So this one has made my life to be so complicated, an extent that I cannot perform my duties as a mother in the family. So at some point in life, I went down that I could not even carry any weight of 1 kg or 2 kilograms. If any case I do that, I feel a lot of pain and I will suffocate, that I cannot even breathe properly, cannot walk. And thereafter, after offloading the pain, I will be down and I cannot perform any duty, maybe for a week or so. So that one has been a challenge to me as a mother because my children are expecting a lot from me. And in our tradition, the Luo culture, a mother is supposed to perform so many duties at a time. For example, you can carry your baby on the back, you carry the water on the head, as you also maybe lead your cows to the homestead. So look at those things I could not do. So I was missing a lot. And when my children looking at me, I could not cook. They were like, Mommy, what's wrong? So we go through pain because God wants the best from us. And through pain, I have come to realize that it makes the relationship between us and God to be more stronger. Like when I got to this ministry, I could sit down with people, and as we share together, we realize that most of people, they suffer the same. So when we discuss, we share, we realized that God has a purpose in our life. And also, as much as we are suffering, or as much as we go through challenges, we have no reason as to why we should not serve the Lord. And we also realized that it is not because of our sin that we go through the pain. We realized that sometimes we go through the pain because God wants the best from us, and a testimony can be made so that people can come even closer to God. So I came to accept the condition that I was in, and I took it positively, believing that God has a purpose in my life. Saying that Broken and Mended as a ministry, personally, it has really helped me a lot because it made me learn from the Bible that there are people who also suffered like us, but it was not because of the sin that they did, or it's not a punishment from God. But we realized that the people must go through challenges for them to be strong in life. So this is the ministry that I embrace fully, and I like it because of who I am today. They have made me strong, and I also feel like I should make people strong through Broken and Mended.
Yeah, so she obviously that powerful testimony, what Broken Mended has brought into her life, was something that we heard constantly while we were there in Kenya. I don't remember how many we recorded their testimonies. We tried to get, I think, a half dozen or so. But I thought that was certainly one of the better ones because of the things she kept talking about, how Broken and Mended helped her realize that she still had purpose in life. God has a purpose for us, and I think that's very important. These are just some pictures from around Africa. The two baptisms that were connected to Broken and Mended that happened in Mombasa, and the sport group sport group meeting in Mombasa. In the center there, right above kind of the caption where the cover of the books are white, that's a Malawi group receiving their books. We just had a new Malawi group get started here just recently. And then the one where the kind of on the side of the house is from Uganda. So we ended up in Uganda, Tanzania, Malawi, South Sudan, and then a little bit on the western part of Africa, like in Ghana. But it hasn't really taken off on that side yet. But East Africa has kept us busy enough. So we made a transition recently. I was the founder and president for, up until just last March, or this March, I mean. And then I transitioned to be full-time with Broken and Mended because I could no longer do full-time preaching ministry and full-time, trying to keep up with Broken and Mended. And so, and God has really blessed us. He's provided for us. At the time we'd just gotten back from Kenya when we made our announcement to the church we were going to be making this transition. Our Broken and Mended bank account had about $2,000 left in it. And so we're thinking, okay, God, we're going on this limb. Don't let it break. And so God has really, provided, for us in that. We're very thankful for that. But we have a new president, Timothy Gunnels, and he's in Tennessee. And you notice that our vice president is from Chile, and he is helping us oversee our Spanish translation project. So we do have these books now in Swahili, and we're working now to get them in Spanish. We're very close on that. We have the proofs. I just need to get the final approval from Andres and his wife, and then we'll go to press with volume 1 of our leaders and reflection guide in Spanish. So that opens up an entirely new demographic. Okay, any questions about Broken and Mended in general before I move us into the next section here? Yes.
Sorry.
No, that's.
So I was talking to Katie and she told me about the Spanish translation too. I actually just reached out to some congregations that I know in Texas that are bilingual congregations. So I'm just trying to figure out an estimated time frame. Are you looking at next year for the Spanish documentation, or
I'd say next month.
Next month. Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, we're that close.
Okay.
We just got to, as soon as Andres and Fabi, his wife, go through and make sure that we already have the leader's guide proof approved. the reflection guide proof for volume 1 has to be approved. And we're already actually translating the volume 2 as well, although that won't be available until next year probably. But we'll have volume 1. So there's 10 sessions in each volume, and we'll have 3 volumes total. So yeah, that's what we like that. Yeah, good question. Anybody else? Yes.
Just curious, will this recording be available afterward for people to watch?
Yes.
Okay,
Soon my technology is holding up.
okay. I'm just thinking of some people that could benefit from this,
Yeah.
that aren't here this morning, so yeah, okay. Thank you.
All right. And, I know I haven't referred to the handouts a little bit, but the first 2 sessions really that we've done are just mainly reflection questions. There will be some fill in the blanks coming up on this next one. We're calling But Not Without Hope. And I'm going to just kind of go by the PowerPoints at this time to save a little time because, all the stuff, extra stuff in my notes, I think it'll be a little bit more efficient. But Mike said I could go past 12 a little. And I know you're going to be getting hungry, so I got to be careful, I know. All right. So I want to say, first of all, before we kind of get into this session, that the way these sessions were originally built, there was a session on lament. I can't remember the subtitle of the lament thing, but it was, something like lamenting our pain to God. And then the second session that went with that was called But Not Without Hope. So given our time constraints, I had to choose either go with lament or hope. I think lament's really important, but I just want you to know that acknowledging what we've lost and grieving that properly is imperative before you can really move into a time where you can reflect on, okay, but how is God working in this pain and in this illness in my life? If you rush that part of it, then you'll end up having to deal with that part later on, one way or another. So you gotta be able to, to grieve what has happened to you, and I think it can take some time. But so we're moving into what we lament, but not without hope. Okay. So eternal life begins in the present life. It means I don't want us to think about hope as only, well, one day I'll go to heaven, which I think is much more involved even when we're talking about that. But eternal life starts now. It's a continuation of what God has started in our lives. And a lot of times it doesn't feel that way because we're hurting, we're sorrow. We experience all these things in this kind of already but not yet type of situation that we live in. But we are experiencing already what it means to be a new creation in Christ. And we are experiencing God at work in our lives and the lives of others around us. Well, that new creation has begun, first of all, in the resurrection of Christ, the first fruits of the resurrection, but it has begun in us. And so Jesus says, I have come so they may have life and have it in abundance. And I don't believe Jesus is saying anything there about the prosperity gospel. I think he's speaking about our life with him, that he's the one that gives the meaning and the hope and the purpose in our life. And, because Jesus also makes it clear that we should expect to suffer, doesn't he? I mean, he tells us in this world you will have many troubles, many trials. And he gives us peace, but not peace as the world. And so we know and expect that we're going to suffer in this world, but we are not suffering without hope. And this hope is something that's forward-looking that also impacts my present reality. If I didn't have that forward-looking hope, it'd be overwhelming, I think. And so I often wonder how people deal with these things without God in their lives. And it's hard for me to imagine because I can't imagine it because God has gotten me through this, is getting me through this. And I think many of you probably can relate to that. So this is kind of what I mentioned already. What Jesus and the rest of the New Testament are pointing to is a deeper and more satisfying life that comes with a close relationship with Jesus, one that is only attainable through the regenerating power of the Holy Spirit. I see someone taking a photo of the screen, so I'll wait. Okay. That's a good idea. That's the way I take notes sometimes too. So I want to tell you, I'll back up I will tell you, I want to set that up. Well, one of my favorite books is a book by C.S. Lewis called Till We Have Faces. I don't know if any of you have read that. And it doesn't necessarily resonate and connect with everyone, but it did with me in a very powerful way. And the story follows this. She starts out, she's a young woman. She's a princess. Her dad is the king, and they're, he's still hoping to have a male heir, and so the last one that ends up being born is a daughter, and so it becomes clear that her name's Aurora, a rule is going to one day, become queen. But her life is one full of tragedy and shame. And so she wears a veil on her face because she's so ugly. She doesn't want anyone to be able to look at her face. And almost her entire life, she wears this veil. This is why it's called Till We Have Faces. So when we're able to not cover up our shame, but to be able to be vulnerable with God. And so it's not really, in a direct sense, a Christian story, because this is kind of set in Greek mythology, kind of what they believed about the gods. And so you're kind of reading along and you think, well, how's, C.S. Lewis was a very committed Christian. So how is he going to work that into the story? Well, it happens here in this quote. And she finally gets an opportunity. She finally has this vision, this opportunity. She's whole time she's saying, I want to make my complaint to the gods. So think about Job, except she's thinking gods instead of God. Well, she meets this particular figure that's not like what she thought of were going to be the gods. And this is what she says: I now know, Lord, why you utter no answer. So she's been wanting answers for all these tragedies in her life. And she says, you are yourself the answer. Before your face, questions die away. What other answer would suffice? And I get goosebumps even now just reading that, because such a powerful, and it becomes very clear, even though he doesn't name this person, who this person is that she has now met, who is the answer. Not an answer to everything that's happened to her, but the answer that really matters. And of course, I can't help but to think about Job. And the story of Job, probably, the traumatic suffering that he's been through. He's angry, understandably. His friends make him angrier because they falsely accuse him, and he's demanding answers from God. Once it's basically like he wants to call God to court and to prosecute his case against God, that God has treated him unjustly. Job doesn't know what's happened behind the scenes. Whether that would have made him feel better or not, I don't know. But I know it wasn't the point of the book for him to know that. And so Job finally says, well, this is God speaking, right? No, this is God. I see he's quoting God here in a moment. This is Job's response when God finally shows up at the end of the book, answers him quite impressively in a speech that was basically, hey, Job, are you God? And of course, Job knows he's not. And it's all about the power and the majesty of God. In other words, the answer that Job really needed was God himself, kind of like a Rule finds out in her story. And this is Job responding to that. He says, I know you can do anything, and no plan of yours can be thwarted. You may ask, who is this who conceals my counsel with ignorance? Surely I spoke about things I did not understand, things too wondrous for me to know. You said, listen now, and I will speak. When I question you, you will inform me. I heard reports about you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore I reject my words and am sorry for them. I am dust and ashes. Job finds out that God himself is the answer, that knowing God and serving God just because he's God, not because of anything that's gone well in your life, is the true answer as we go through our trials. And so I think this is in your handout, but chronic illness is a difficult cross to bear, but not without purpose. The purpose is found in the words of the Apostle Paul. My goal is to know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings, being conformed to his death, assuming that I will somehow reach the resurrection from among the dead. So I remember one time I had this favorite prayer spot in my grandparents' land in East Texas. It was up in a tree. And I would go up there and I would pray. And I remember praying this prayer and pausing after I got past this to know him and the power of his resurrection, and had to really contemplate whether sharing in the fellowship of his sufferings is what I wanted. Because I think sometimes we skip over that part when we're talking about the Christian experience. Being conformed to him in his death, like, I don't know. That sounds pretty tough. I better be pretty serious if I'm going to say those words. But it shows that through those experiences, if that means I'm going to know Christ more, that Paul says it's worth it. And Paul knows what he's talking about, right? Because he's been through a tremendous amount of suffering in his life by the time he writes this. So for me, knowing God for who he is is the purpose of our lives, period, whether I'm going through chronic illness or not. But if chronic illness, chronic pain can help me come into that realization that I can share in the fellowship of the sufferings of Christ, and through that to experience a closer fellowship with Him, then ultimately I have to say it's worth it. And sometimes I've been asked before, if you could go back and reset all this and not go through what you've gone through, would you say yes? And I honestly have to say no. I just feel like what God has been doing and what God has done in my life and also through my life is too valuable for me to say that I would go back and not go through this. But if you'd asked me at the beginning, I would have said no way. Which is the natural response, right? Okay, so okay. See, I'm not using my notes. I told you that kind of helped bring context to some of these. But it jogs my memory as we go along. So it's talking about the things that we lose. Okay, so the things that we lament. I come up with I think 6 different things. I don't know if I'll remember them all right now, but one of them is the loss of dreams. Another is loss of financial control. Another is sometimes loss of relationships. We can lose relationships because of what we go through with chronic illness and pain. I know another of them was loss of dignity. And that can be an extreme form. I've known people who sadly have gone through even the loss of being able to control their bowels, and things. So there's a lot of things that happen to us when we're going through this kind of suffering that it could be as something as simple as having to put on a silly hospital gown. But the point is we kind of go through an experience of loss of dignity through this process, as well as everyone's poking and prodding us and all that kind of stuff throughout the process. And then I know loss of mental health is a big one. So there are 6 of these. Maybe it'll jog my memory as we go through this. But the first one was loss of dreams, and that knowing God for who He is this corresponding gain. So we're looking at this in terms of losses and gains. And I'm not saying that's always symmetrical or that we always can appreciate those gains in the midst of the losses, but I'm just taking it as kind of looking at it as a whole. Okay, yes, I have lost greatly in this area, but what has God given to me through it? So being able to know God for who He is, not just because of my health or because everything's going well in my life, that is a gain. So the other one was I talked about this loss of financial control. Sometimes we need to be reminded that our worth is not in our assets and our money. And so Paul wrote, instruct those who are rich in this present age not to be arrogant or to set their hope on uncertainty of wealth, but on God who richly provides us with all things to enjoy. Instruct them to do what is good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and willing to share, storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of what is truly life. And so again, I would love to be able to solve all our financial issues that have been caused by this. And I would still say, yes, give me a solution, God, to that, because carrying crippling, life-altering debt is no fun. But it does remind me not to put my hope and identity in wealth as well. And there can be a gain related to that. So living for something greater than money is a gain. Many living for wealth were in real danger of not taking hold of what is truly life, to quote Paul. If we are humbled by our financial circumstances due to the medical expenses and debt, then we can thank God that He has broken the spell of living for wealth, which robs us of life itself. In other words, life in Him. This was the one I was forgetting a while ago, was the loss of time. And loss of time can be, if people experience it in different ways. For me, I experienced it in feeling like I was losing time in doctor's appointments and trips and procedures, and even going to get medicines all the time. And I had all this other stuff I wanted to do that I couldn't do, or I had very little time to do them. But others have talked about time in the chronic illness as something that feels like it's kind of stands still. Like I have a good friend who's actually on our board, and she's an author, and she said, for her, it was like time was standing still, because she couldn't do so many things. She felt like she had all the time in the world, but couldn't do anything with it. So it was kind of a different experience. I guess your experience of time is relative to just your perspective. And, for me, though, it was like it was slipping away. And so I like Lord of the Rings, and I usually try to work it in wherever I can. And it annoys certain people, but certain people,
You can ignore those people.
yeah, I know.
That's what I do.
Yeah, that's right. Certain people, we just need to see how much wisdom here is from people like Gandalf and the Lord of the Rings, who told Frodo, all we have to decide is what to do with the time that he's given us. God does not expect us to control time. And we don't need to feel guilty for time getting away from us. We're just expected to do what we can with whatever time we have. Okay, and this is still related to loss of time. We don't define ourselves by our productivity. And if you were doing that before chronic illness and chronic pain came your way, it was probably a rude awakening for us. We have to be reminded of what our identity is really in. And I want us to be reminded too that the Bible does not endorse a lot of times what we would see as kind of American busyness and productivity, or you could call it the Protestant work ethic, or whatever. That it does not endorse finding our value in that. We're defined by who God says we are. So from creation to the ministry of Jesus and the words of the apostles, we see a picture of grace and invitation to rest. We see value that has nothing to do with productivity. When we let God define who we are instead of our world, we breathe the air of restful grace and discover God delights in us simply as he made us, and not because he needed us to do something for him. I think some people have this idea that God needs me to do this, and God needs me to do. No, God doesn't need anything. Everything that God gives us, even our callings and ministry, are grace from him. God invites us into partnership with him. That is very different than God needing us. If God needed us, he's codependent on us, and we know that that's not the case. God's not trying to use us, manipulate us, or anything like that. Yes, sir.
I was thinking of Paul, who was blessed with all this training in the scriptures and all, and the great talent he had of starting churches. And God puts him in the dungeon of a Roman prison so that he could write half the New Testament.
Yeah.
That wasn't his plan, but it was God's plan.
That's right. That's right. And Paul even says about all those things in one place, right? Including when he was in prison, because it was the Philippians, that I count all those things as loss, as rubbish. Words actually a little stronger in the Greek when we normally translate it into the New Testament. But basically, Paul says, none of that stuff really matters, and God didn't need it. God can use those things, but it didn't mean that God needed those things. And yeah, you're right. He was his plan got changed pretty dramatically. So yeah. All right, this next one is about lost relationships. And I don't have a whole lot of dramatic stories about that in my life, but I have heard some horrible ones. As a matter of fact, I just recently was told, but a wife left her husband because she was just done with all of it, all the pain and suffering and things that he was going through. I hear those stories all the time, including when husbands leave wives and wives leave husbands, and our best friends decide that you're not really much use to me anymore, or all these kinds of terrible things that can happen. I've been more fortunate in that particular arena, but I'm still sensitive to the fact of how people are impacted by it. One with many friends may be harmed, but there is a friend who stays closer than a brother. We want that to be true, don't we? And often we do find it to be true. One of the things I say about this when it comes to the loss of friends, yes, that's true, but in a way, chronic illness exposes who our real friends really were to begin with. And so sometimes people are going to leave you and walk away from you when trouble comes. Well, then they were in it for something they were getting out of it, not just because they were your true. And I hate to say that. And I want us to say that we want to keep open grace for them to come back into our lives. We're called to be forgiving people. But I don't want us to think that somehow we really lost a really good friend when it showed that person really wasn't a good friend after all. And so value those people who do stick by your side, and really appreciate them. Those that stick closer than a brother. This is a very famous verse, just kind of picking up there. If one falls down, his friend can help him up, but pity the man who falls and has no one to help him up. And sometimes in this ministry of Broken and Mended, I encounter people who feel like they have no one to help you. They really feel truly alone. And I get that, but that's why we've created Broken and Mended, is in order to help people at least know that there is an understanding, compassionate community that they can be a part of. And sometimes people that are isolated and depressed, though, feel like it's not that they feel like they don't need that. They become so hopeless. They feel hopeless that they won't take the chance to get involved in a support group or something like that. And so we're trying to help people see that you cannot bear this burden on your own. And if you don't have those kinds of relationships in your life, you need to pray that somehow that God provides them, because isolation kills, sometimes literally. True friends. So I've already kind of mentioned that. So let's appreciate even more those who would never leave and those whose friendship is shown to be the genuine article. I certainly in my life have a few friends have risen to the top during this time. And by the way, including my wife, who's been wonderful and supportive through this whole ordeal, but some other good friends in my life, male friends in my life, have proven to be wonderful, incredible friends during this time. And they were not people that had chronic illness, chronic pain. So you can have, those who maybe don't understand what you're going through, but they can still love you and they can still support and pray for you. Talked about the loss of dignity. Well, this is kind of the gain of something, greater than a loss of dignity, which is ultimately realizing that Christ has borne our shame for us. We don't need to bear it anymore. And so this is talking about the people that the roll call of the faithful that we see in Hebrews chapter 11. And it says that they did not receive what was promised. It's kind of interesting to think about that, but it says reason why is so that they would not be made perfect, without us. And so we recognize that even in this intermediate state where these people have died, the faithful, that they're not complete until the end, till the resurrection, when we are all made whole, together. But it was in this context that we find out something about, shame from the perspective of Jesus. It says, therefore, since we also have such a great cloud of witnesses, the faithful, surrounding us, let us lay aside every hindrance and the sin that so easily ensnares us. Let us run with endurance the race that lies before us, keeping our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy that lay before him, he endured the cross, despising the shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. That despising the shame is an interesting statement because there was no more shameful way to die in that world than to be crucified. And I think here we're despising the shame. It doesn't mean that Jesus obviously wasn't going to avoid it because of the shame that was involved in it. It's that he recognized that something much greater was taking place and that he was going to sit at the right hand of God. And so for that, he could endure that shame. And those of us who follow in the footsteps of Christ, if we're willing to suffer with him, we will also share in that same glory. And that really puts our shame, our loss of dignity, embarrassment, whatever you want to call it, into perspective. We may still have those feelings from time to time, but again, they do not define us. And our shame has been borne by Christ on the cross, who is now at the right hand of God. And Paul even says in Ephesians that we are seated in the heavenly places with Christ. We may not feel like we're in heavenly places, but he's speaking about our status with Christ. And that is a picture of our future as well as reality, spiritual reality in our present. So his glory is greater than our shame. Jesus' story did not end with suffering shame. It ends with eternal glory. When we follow Jesus, we find a path that gives meaning to our suffering and shame, even if it doesn't explain it. The last was talking about our loss in mental health. And so the counter to that is really something that covers a lot more than mental health. It's the idea of shalom. You guys probably have heard that word before, but it gets translated peace a lot in our English. It's a Hebrew word. And so shalom is the way things are supposed to be. And that we even know things are not the way they are supposed to be is evidence of a standard that currently is out of our reach, a sign of a loving God who wants to bless his creation. How do we know this is not the way things are supposed to be? There's something deeply embedded in us that know that God has something better in store for us. And it started off much better, of course, in the original creation. But in this reality that we live in now, we rarely experience shalom in its truest sense. But it doesn't mean that God isn't working to bring about shalom through the restoration to relationship with him and relationship with others. And so shalom is our ultimate destiny, our ultimate future, where everything will be as it's supposed to be. Our relationship with God, our relationship with others, our relationship with creation, the new creation that God is bringing about will be completely restored. So I may struggle with depression and anxiety today. I still struggle with those things, especially depression. And I'm glad it's somewhat controllable for me, but if I have to still bear that burden through this life, I do know at least that in the next, I will experience shalom. There will be no losses that will continue to be with me then. So, takeaway: the great arc of the biblical story moves from creation to new creation, where things will be as they are supposed to be in an even fuller sense than it was in the beginning. And the reason why it will be even better than it was with Adam and Eve, because this time there will be no chance of us ever rupturing shalom again. All the work is complete in Christ, and we will no longer be able to ruin things like we did in the beginning. I love this passage. It gets read at a lot of funerals. I read it at a lot of funerals, but it's just a beautiful picture of our ultimate dwelling with God. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. I also saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared like a bride adorned for her husband. Then I heard a loud voice from the throne. Look, God's dwelling is with humanity, and he will live with them. They will be his peoples. So CSB puts that in the plural. So I think it's people groups, in other words, nations. And God himself will be with them and will be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Grief, crying, and pain will be no more, because the previous things have passed away. Whatever we have to endure, we only have to endure it for a little while. And we have this promise from God of a griefless and painless experience to come. So,
I like the next chapter, the tree of life, and it leaves with the tree for the healing of the nations.
It's beautiful, isn't it? Yeah, it really is. It really is. So, I'm going to move into this next session, and I am going to go a little past 12, but I won't go as far as to 12:30. I want to give you that assurance. So somewhere in between that, if you have to leave because you have other plans, or I understand. It's just taking me a little longer. Well, not longer than I expected necessarily, but sometimes I tell myself, "Oh, I'll get through this quickly," and it doesn't quite work. So I do want to just talk about helping the hurting, and this is for people that don't have this particular cross to bear, this chronic pain and suffering, but they want to be supportive of those in their lives who do. And you can think about a spouse or another family member or a good friend. And really, I'm speaking to people here that from the Stephen ministry that have been doing this a lot longer than I have and know a lot more about this. So you may have your own things you can contribute. But these are my observations, particularly on this issue of chronic pain and chronic illness. And so I know we'll move through this kind of quickly. We all need humility when dealing with these difficult challenges surrounding chronic pain and illness. One of the things, the reason why I have that as kind of this opening takeaway is because sometimes people with chronic illness and chronic pain this happens, especially when you start to find this as your identity, you begin to think your suffering is worse than anybody and it's more important than anybody, and you diminish other people's suffering, or you become very short with people. No, you don't get it. You could never get it. Well, that's not the way Christ would have us, to act. Now, I understand that there are sometimes people in our lives that are harming us because of, their abusive language. That's a different scenario. But I'm just talking about sometimes people in our lives that, they don't get it maybe fully, but they have their own suffering. Everybody has suffering and pain in this life. And it comes in all different forms. It can come through broken relationships. It can come through disease and pain. It can come through loss of loved ones, which we all go through. And all disappointment, heartbreak, financial ruin comes not only to those with chronic pain and chronic illness. So, I mean, all these kinds of things happen to all of us in life. And so part of this was just to encourage those of us that do have chronic pain and illness to remember to stay humble in this too. And sometimes I know when I haven't been, or with Katie, or where I was dismissive of some pain she was experiencing, I realized I was in the wrong, and then I need to go and say, no, I'm sorry. If anything, my pain should make me more empathetic toward people going through any kind of pain for however long it's going to be. So that was just going to kind of set the posture and attitude of this session, so I don't want to unnecessarily offend people, and if we come into something here that I say you should never do and you have done it, I'm not trying to make you feel bad about it. I'm just trying to help us all kind of realize some things that maybe are not so helpful to do. I'm going to start on what not to say or do. And the first is don't try to fix us. This is a big temptation for people. And so one of the ways is just, telling people to suck it up. My brother's an Army Ranger and he tells me that all the time. But most of the time that's not very helpful. And telling us to try the latest remedy you read about on the internet. Okay. This happens a lot, and it's actually somewhat condescending and dismissive of the person who's going through the thing, as if we don't also have the internet. My Aunt Judy, she gave up diet sodas and she was healed of all her problems. I see you're drinking diet soda. That's what you need to do. That'll heal you. Or I found this special diet that helps so and so, and everybody's unique. Everyone's different, and there are times, by the way, I have tried different diets that have, and some of them have helped me, control inflammation. It's not that I want to be opposed to new information that might be helpful, but when it's unsolicited, then it's usually not helpful, and usually it's not going to be accepted very well, and so. If you can avoid saying things like that, I think that would be a good start. So this next thing is really things. I pulled my Facebook group. It's got 500 or so people in it saying what things have people done or said to you that were unhelpful. So this is really feedback from them more than just myself. So I've already covered this one. You should try this diet, this supplement, this holistic treatment, etc. Let's pray for healing for you. Now, that's not a bad thing to say or to do, but if it's said in a certain way, or if it's said in a way that you just don't even want to hear about what I'm going through, say, well, let me just pray that God heals you. It can be dismissive. It can imply even that you haven't prayed enough or you haven't prayed correctly. And this kind of comes more into the prosperity gospel type places that are prone to that. But prosperity gospel is leaked into everywhere, and it's leaked into churches who wouldn't normally be identified with that gospel too. And it's just this idea that if something's wrong with you, God obviously intends to fix it. And if he hasn't, then, well,
It's on you.
It's on you. That's right. And it comes across that way, even if you didn't mean it to. So this is a bad one, but is your sin causing your illness? Sin can cause illness sometimes. We know that, but most of the time that's not true. And even if it were, let's say if someone had AIDS and they lived a promiscuous lifestyle, they're aware that that's what brought it on. And, and it doesn't do any good to shame people further, about it. And so asking someone, is their sin causing your illness, is not very helpful. They simply move past it, my illness, as if it's boring or a burden to talk about. We talked a little bit about some of this last night, just how, sometimes they ask you how you're doing, and their eyes kind of start glaze over as they wanted you to say fine. And you started to say more than that, and it was more than they bargained for. I think part of it is on us too, with chronic illness, chronic pain, to kind of learn the people that we really can share with how we're doing. And we have those people in our lives, and those are the people we can really unburden ourselves to. But there will be people in our lives that just seem to not care anymore. And I don't know what to tell you to do about it. I'm just saying that don't be that person, though, if you're on the other side of things. Don't be a person who becomes bored with your friend or loved one suffering. We don't want to talk about it all the time either, by the way. But there are times where we'll need to talk about it. Not caring enough to learn, so you don't have any curiosity about it. You just want to fix them. Kind of goes back into that. I got a solution for you. Everyone see those if you needed them. We want some. Next slide. You look so good. Implied, so you must be better. You don't look sick. Do I look sick standing up here before you today? And a lot of people don't, right? It's called invisible illness. And a lot of us have those illnesses that are not obvious just to look at. And so, it doesn't really help too if you say you look so bad. It's kind of insulting as well. But yeah, when you but what this is someone saying, well, I just, I don't feel very good. I'm hurting. And so, well, you look good. Well, as if that should therefore mean you ought to feel good. Are you still having problems? Some people don't know what the word chronic means. And so you have to remind them if you can, if they'll listen. But yeah, you don't want to say, are you still having problems, as if you should have been over it by now. we've already talked about the diet or stop doing this or that. You need to stop taking pain medication. So here now you're putting yourself in the position of a medical expert. And it's, some pain medications do have drawbacks. Of course, we know that, but you are not in a position to know whether that person needs to take those pain meds or not. That's between them and their doctor. Addiction is a very real issue, but the studies on that have shown that the people that get addicted generally, okay, are not the people who have a real need for chronic illness or chronic pain. It's people that had a short bout of pain and were prescribed maybe too much, and then they kept taking it afterwards. And those are the people that typically fall into addiction. Either way, addiction is not good, but you're still not in a position to tell them if they should be taking pain medications or not. We're all going through that. It's called getting older. That's terrible. Yeah, I have been told that literally, and sorry, but it's by older people who would tell me, "Wait till you get my age." When I was telling them, and it's like you don't understand at all what I just told you if you say that. When I get your age, it's not going to be any better for me, and it's probably going to be worse because I have this progressive disease. And people, my son has the same disease I do, my middle child. And he gets his treatment from people too. Sometimes it's that you can't really be hurting because you're too young, kind of idea. All right, you're too young. Oh, there you go. You're too young to have arthritis. Wait until you get my age. So kind of spoiled that one, didn't I? Yeah, you need to be up and down more and walk more to stay limber. Again, it's not that that's not maybe true in some cases. It would be in my case. But if I'm really bearing my heart to you, probably don't need you to say something that would seem judgmental or you're not trying enough, you're not doing enough. Someone always has it worse. Let me tell you about, okay? Also, I would say though, for those people that have chronic pain and chronic illness, sometimes you'll dismiss your own pain by saying, well, someone always has it worse. We've almost been taught to do this. And it really isn't the point if someone has it worse. Obviously, somebody has it worse somewhere in the world. I mean, that's going to be true. But when your pain is more personal for you, and therefore what you're going through is worse for you. And so don't try to dismiss your own pain or let someone else dismiss your own pain because someone has it worse. That's not helpful on either side. We've already seen something similar to this, but why aren't you? Are you still hurting? Why aren't you better yet? No. All right, I wanted to share just a couple other things because I just read this book. So this was not something when I did this session in Sherman, Texas last spring that I had read this book. It's from Dave Furman. It's called Being There. And Dave Furman writes from the person who has chronic pain, chronic illness, but he's writing to people who are spouses, loved ones, friends of people in that situation. And so he's got a lot of good chapters in there, but my favorite chapter was the one he called "Whatever You Do, Don't Do These Things." And so some of these overlap with what I've already shared with you, but a few of them I hadn't thought of, and I wanted to kind of hit on. There are 10 of them, and so just kind of go. We already kind of hit on that, right? Don't be the fix-it person. That's really hard for some people. Some people want to fix it, and that's just kind of the way they're driven. And those people do a lot of good things. So it's not like that's this terrible flaw. It's just that it's not always appropriate in every situation. And some things you can't fix. That's the thing that's maybe hard to accept for fix-it people. Don't play the comparison game. And sometimes people do this. Okay, like for example, Dave Furman, he had this horrible neurological disease that affected his arms, caused him extremely painful bouts. It was kind of like your nerves burning and that sort of thing. And he actually lost the ability to use his arms. He couldn't hold his own kids and that sort of thing. And sometimes somebody would say, "Oh yeah, I have shoulder problem too," or "I had," or they'll just compare it to something they've experienced or someone else has experienced. And it just, even if it were true that they had something similar, I think you could say that in an empathetic way, but when you do it in terms of comparing, it's no good. It ends up dismissing what that person just told you. And some people have a tendency to, everything you tell them, they want to tell you their own story. And I don't think that's usually the best thing to do. I think it's usually best to listen. There may be a time where you want to share a story that you can relate to them, but lot of times we're too quick to do that, and we haven't even let the person finish speaking before we start jumping in with the story. One upmanship, yeah. Guys like the movie Jaws, when they're on the boat and they're comparing the different scars that they have and all that. Yeah, no one do that. Don't make it their identity. Okay, we talked about us chronic illness people not saying that's our identity, but also, so this is almost like the opposite of being dismissive. It's where they see you, and every single time you ask them about their pain, about their illness. Well, you don't want to forget it. Be occasional about this, because they might want to talk about what the Detroit Lions did yesterday, right? I mean, they may not always want to talk about this this pain, this burden that they carry. Let them kind of lead the way on that, I think, but it would be a good thing to do. Don't promise deliverance now. Sometimes people will say, I just know God's going to heal you. Well, you don't know. And, and I think you don't want to promise something that's not yours to promise. Don't encourage them just to move on. It's not possible to move on if the pain hasn't left, right? I mean, you've got to, you may have to accept it, but again, that's not your job to tell them to move on. Don't bring on the Inquisition. So in the context, Dave Furman, because when I read this chapter, he was actually talking about situations of tragic loss and grief. So he was talking about how he gave the example someone died in a car accident, happens all the time. And the first thing you want to do is, were they wearing a seatbelt? Had they had anything to drink? And, again, this is just bringing judgment into a situation that just needs love, empathy, and care for them in a time of terrible loss. But that would also apply to people with chronic illness and chronic pain too. You don't want to be the Inquisition. Don't be hyper spiritual. Yeah, I'm remembering now what that means. So he gave a real example of a person who had lost their daughter as like a toddler or an infant or something like that. And the minister walked right up to that person and said something like, praise God, your baby's with Jesus, and at the funeral he was doing. Yeah, and that was not a hypothetical. That was something that Dave knew about personally. That's what he means, that you don't just try to, we can try to explain everything away spiritually, kind of, in a way that that is very harmful to people. We want to be spiritual. That's not what he's saying. He said, just don't try to just explain away someone's suffering by saying, well, it's all going to work out in the end. All things work together for the good of those who love them, those kinds of things. By the way, it's a great verse, and it has its appropriate use. It's probably not at the person's funeral, that we want to go to that. Don't play the avoidance game. We talked about that. It's the attitude of, I'm just going to pretend like this isn't happening to you. We're never going to talk about it. So you see the extremes that we're talking about. One of them was, don't make it my identity all the time. But the other one is don't play the avoidance game. So you're wanting to kind of balance those two things together. Don't pledge general help. I think that's an interesting one, because a lot of times we'll say to someone going through a crisis or suffering, let me know if there's anything I can do for you. And of course, they never do say anything to that, because so Dave says, be specific, say, hey, I'm going to bring dinner over to you on Tuesdays or something like that, that help someone. Or you're not doing this in a pushy way, but you're offering to do specific things. A youth minister that we had in New Mexico, it was kind of interesting, actually. We weren't all that good friends. We had some problems. It's not Mike. But it was someone that I did have some personal issues with. And when I had my hip surgery, he just showed up at our house and mowed our yard. I think I just heard the lawnmower running out there. Said, "What's going on?" And it was Marcus out there mowing the yard. I mean, that touched me. Especially from someone that maybe we weren't best friends. But he wanted to love me in that way after I'd had my surgery. Don't condemn them. We should never be condemning anyone. It's not our job. I can't remember exactly. I brought the book with me, but just for time, I'm not going to bring it out. I don't remember exactly what Dave's specific application, was there, but probably something along the lines of blaming people for not getting healed yet. That's probably something along those lines that he means. Yeah. So, all right. So that's what not to do. Is there anything you guys would add to it?
Don't forget that each individual struggle is subjective, and that'll help us stay in our place.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Each individual struggle is subjective, keeps us humble, keeps us in our lane. Yeah, it's good. Yes, go ahead.
I always get, you're always sick. I have like 3 chronic things.
Mhm. Yeah, that's kind of how chronic works, isn't it?
That's not nice.
No, no, it's not.
I don't want to be identified as a sick person.
Right, right. Yeah, that's right. It's not your identity. What else?
Sorry. Don't make me an invalid. Just because I may not feel well does not mean that I can't continue on. Respect my knowledge of my own limitation.
Yeah, yeah. Respect my knowledge of my own limitation. I'll get you. I just want to follow up on that because I've had that experience. Because I have a spinal disease, sometimes people see me lifting something and they think it's their place to say, hey, I mean, I've been lectured by people about it and telling me you should ask someone else to do that. You shouldn't be doing that. And it really, it's kind of hurtful because I'm thinking, I know when I can lift that box and when I can't. Right now happens to be a time when I can, and I want to do what I can when I can. Yeah. So I understand that. Okay. So yes.
Along the same line, what you think is, when we realize we no longer can do what we used to be able to do, we have to realize that God grants us mercy. And then not only does God grant us mercy, we have to grant ourselves that mercy.
Yeah.
And that sometimes it's hard to do, but when we realize that, then it frees us from the expectation that we think we should be doing more.
Sure. Yes, good point. Well, we have this tendency too, sometimes we're afraid to disappoint people. And so we might do something we shouldn't do, kind of converse to what you were saying, because of that. And I'm learning, it's difficult for me, but I'm learning more to just say no. And if they have a problem with it, or they think less of me, it's going to have to be their problem. We've had some people recently, if they were asking for help to move someone. Well, I was actually intending to go do it. I was going to go help move them. The day before, I get the worst back spasm that I'd had, in several years. And so I decided not to do it. And part of me wanted to send to the group text, hey, I'm out, because I had this back. And then for some reason I felt like I'm just going to say, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to over explain myself. I'm just going to say, I can't do this right now. And they're going to have to come to their own judgment. But yeah, I'm not going to let their opinion of me define me or make me feel guilty. All right, let's do some helpful things to do. So the most important thing to do is believe us when we tell you we are hurting. This is something I feel like Katie really excels at, because she knows I try to do what I can do. And so if I say to her, I'm sorry, I'm done. I've got to go get the car and lay down when you finish the shopping trip, or I've got to check, or I just can't do this event. She believes me. She says, okay. And we make an adjustment to whatever the plans are. But some people, all they get is guilt trips when they say something like that. So believing somebody when they tell you that they are hurting is really important. And I put that as number one. And again, this is coming from the kind of the brainstorming of the Facebook groups. Not all of these are mine, but I think they're all good. Ask how I'm feeling and really listen. So again, not to the extreme where that's all you ever ask them about, but you should sometimes. And then you should actually listen and attentively and compassionately. Let's see. Comments. Yeah, so these are appreciated comments. I'm so sorry you're going through this. Pretty simple, isn't it? I'll pray for you. And then do it, by the way, if you say that. You can even sometimes pray for them right then if you don't know that. Yeah. I wish I could take it away. Sometimes I feel like that's kind of what I say to my kids when they're in pain or something like that. But when I do see someone in tremendous suffering, maybe I say, yeah, I wish somehow that could go away, or take that away from you. But I'm bringing you a meal. This is going to what we talked about earlier, specific. I'm giving you a ride. I'm cleaning your house. Action. They appreciate those sorts of things. Now, if you say I'm cleaning your house and they say, I really don't want you to, well, then you got to respect the boundaries there. But still, to make these offers in a very real, tangible way, I think is important. How about this one? I want to spend some time together. What would you be comfortable doing? Yeah, instead of that all-day shopping trip, would you be comfortable watching all the Lord of the Rings movie with me this afternoon? Yes. Yeah. Sometimes you might not be able to do some things, but you can still do some things. And if you ask them, what would you like to do? And I'd like to spend some time with you. I think that's very, very meaningful, helpful thing to do.
and respect the answer.
Respect the answer. Yeah.
I say that, and I'm sorry, I'm interjecting. Someone just asked me, what do you want to do for your birthday? And I said, ideally, let's all get our own books, have coffee, and not talk. I'm an introvert, right? And everyone thought that I was crazy, and right. And so I'm just saying, if I tell you something that I would like, even if you don't want to do it, like, that's not for me, but at least respect what I'm saying.
Right. Yeah.
And don't judge me. I see the judgment on your face.
Yeah, and that whole thing about believing people are saying, yeah, I know you're in pain. How are you doing mentally? I think you could substitute other words here. Maybe how are you doing emotionally? How are you doing spiritually? Just kind of, you're recognizing, therefore, it's not just the physical aspect of this. It has so many other implications too. And by the way, sometimes the pain itself is horrible. And so we're not dismissing that either, but it affects us in a lot of other ways. Can I take care of your kids for an afternoon so you can get some rest? Wow.
You hear that, Mike?
We had some people in Portales, New Mexico, who did this for us often, like weekly. They would take our kids. Was it Fantastic Fridays? Yeah, Fantastic Fridays. They'd pick the kids up from school. We wouldn't see them until it was time for them to go to bed, and they did that all the time. And it was so great for Katie and I to recharge, be together. That would have been true without any of the chronic stuff, right? I mean, that's just good to do for someone's dealing with raising kids, but they especially blessed us. And also they brought dinner once a week on top of that, on Thursdays, I think, or something it was. They would just bring dinner over. So the takeaway here, as we kind of come to a close, we need your love and support. If we never have to deal with chronic pain, that would still be true, right? We want to be loving, supportive of one another. It's not truer because of chronic pain, but it makes us more aware of the need that we have for each other. And in that, there is a blessing. And let's be sure we don't waste it. So I'll close here. Let's see how I did. 12:16. I told you to be right between. I will take a few more comments. Yes, if you haven't, go ahead.
So often in our world, when we have chronic pain, shrinks down to be focusing on what we cannot do. And we miss out on all the things we can do. So one way for me to remember that is the motto is do all you can while you can until you can't.
Yeah.
And when you do that, you'll live a life of non-regrets.
Yeah.
To the end.
Yeah, it's well said. It's well said. Yeah, I look at it as, and everyone's disease is different. Mine is one that can have some pretty big ups and downs, and those ups can last years, so can the downs. And so when I'm in those windows of opportunity, I try to do whatever I can, take advantage of. Because now I've realized, when that was taken for granted what I used to be able to do. And so when I am able to do, I like to do it. Yeah. Yes.
Can you throw that quote from Kiss Away back up on I was way in the beginning and I was very good, but I missed it.
Yeah, we're gonna go find that. I think that was a previous session.
Yeah, it was before we took break.
You can see all of this whole presentation in reverse. It would have been here somewhere. There it is.
There it is. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Mm-hmm. Anything else, Mike? Some closest in approved? Oh yeah. Well, that's true, because I want to see all of you tomorrow. I don't think all of you will be there tomorrow. So there's stuff on the table. I didn't bring like a flyer for this particular thing, but we are having a virtual conference on October 18th. One of our speakers is Dave Furman. So been speaking about him, and I don't know if any of you know who Benita Reisner is, but someone that's well known in the chronic illness disability world, and she's going to be one of our speakers. And then we got some others that aren't as well known, but they're really awesome, and they got incredible stories, heartbreaking, but also faithful stories of God's faithfulness in their life through some of the tragedy. And so that's free. You do have to register for it though, so that you'll get the YouTube live link and all that. So you can find it on our website, brokenandmended.org. There's actually a pop-up window in the right-hand corner of our website that you can just click on, or at the top banner, you can also click on that to go register. So it'll take you to registration. So we're pretty excited about that. We think that that's going to be a really big thing, and we're still 45 days out, and I think we have 100 registered or almost, and I expect it at least double between now and the time of the conference. And so yes.
Did you say how long that is? Is it a day thing? Is it
It's one day, so Eastern time here. So it starts at 1 o'clock your time, and I think it ends around 7:15. There is an hour break worked into that as well.
And
So
what was the date again?
October 18th. Yeah, so I think that's a really big deal. I will mention, we do have some response cards on the table as well. There are different ways, and some of them, some are, I want to help financially with the ministry, and if you're in a position to do that, we greatly need it, especially monthly contributors. And I always say that people that could even do $25 a month, then we know that we can budget on that, right? And so it's if you had 100 people doing 2,500, I mean, 2,500, yeah, but you got 100 people doing $25 a month, Mike, what is that? Yeah, thank you. I didn't go to my, yeah, $2,500 a month. So that makes a big deal, that big difference. So, but also you could click on there. I want to learn more about the ministry. I see click. I'm sorry. It's actual paper. Or I want to get connected to a support group. And so and I don't have anything on about the conference about that, but that's something just keep in mind, brokenmended.org, and you can find the information for the conference there. Anything else, Katie, I should say? Feel free to look through those books. Don't take them, please. Okay. Well, yeah. Yeah. You can get well, I won't get into where you can get our books and all that, but I mean, some are spiral bound. The ones that we have that we ship ourselves. The ones that are on Amazon are not spiral bound. So the spiral bound are a little more expensive, but some people like that because they just lay open for you, that kind of thing. Anything else? You want to turn it over to Mike to
Well, I forgot to say thank you for David and Katie for the time.